Welcome back to another session of accurately handling the Word of Truth, a study that we've been on for some time now in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, 12, 13, and 14. And we are now embarking on chapter 11, halfway through it, and I would need you to look at your study guide, and for those of you that can see the overhead, I want to simply explain to you where we're at in this study. There's a method to the madness that's going on here, and I want to tell you is that here's just a brief overview of these 4 chapters here as I have been teaching them over the past few years. It all is summed up by Paul. He could have said this to the Corinthians when he started out chapter 11. He could have exactly said this thing that he says to Timothy, and Timothy was supposed to say it to the people in Ephesus. But he says this, is that thou mayest know how to behave thyself in the house of God, which is the church. And he has chapters in 1 Timothy on how to behave in the house of God, but these 4 chapters, 11 through 14, are the Corinthian version of how to behave in the house of God, which is the church. It all has to do, all 4 chapters have to do with public behavior during worship times in the church, where there are people that are observing how you behave, your attitudes, your character in the church. And that's what these chapters are all about. Now, he spends almost all of these 4 chapters not giving them fatherly advice. He spends almost the whole time rebuking, correcting, refuting false ideas, and sometimes instructing. But as you can see here, I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but you'll notice where, if you look at chapter 11, where the red print is, that's the section that we're going to be studying over the next while here on our Tuesday teachings. See how it fits in with chapter 11, 12, 13, and 14. Now, just last June, I finished up on the end of chapter 14, 1 Corinthians chapter 14, talking about his instructions and corrections on prophecy and speaking in tongues. Now, you may wonder, why in the world am I now jumping 3 chapters back and now talking about this other subject? Well, the fact of the matter is that when I was going through this, understanding that these chapters had to do with how you behave in the house of God, I looked at this section, I went, I don't know how this fits in. I got nothing on this section. And so I deferred until I was totally done with chapter 14. I went to the Lord and I said, I don't know how this fits in. And as a result of that, I started to see things.
Up there, on your ear.
I'm back, but I may not be. Anyway, I started seeing how this fits in with the theme of Paul to instruct and rebuke and correct them on their behavior in public meetings. This whole section is on behavior in the public meetings, and you're going to see right away that their behavior in the public meetings was the big issue with this. I'm not reading through that or explaining any further than that. You can think about it more if you're interested as we go. But I'm going to now move on to our first slide there. 1 Corinthians 11:17. Now, in this that I declare unto you, I praise you not. That should be praise there. The P is missing. I praise you not that you come together for the better, not for the better, but for the worse. He comes. I tell you, he comes out swinging. He does not. He's not in any way creeping up on this subject. He is jumping right in, and he is in confrontation mode. Some have believed that the letter of 1 Corinthians was just simply advice to a church that needed help. No, it was a full-on conflict with a church that was stubbornly resistant to obeying God. The first word there, now, that word means in the next place. However, and it can mean in the next place, it can mean however, it can mean on the other hand. All of those it can mean, and Paul utilizes that, all three of those meanings. Whenever you see the word now in the book of 1 Corinthians, that's a signal that he's changing subjects. He just finished with the subject in the first half of chapter 11. He was talking about the abuses of women through the means of demanding head coverings on them and subjugation of women. He now changes subjects, and he comes out swinging again, saying that I'm now changing subjects, and it's in the next place. He's expressing a difference. If you go back to verse 2 of chapter 11, you'll find out where he says, I praise you for some things. Well, in verse 17, he says, on the other hand, however, I do not praise you on this thing. Now, here's the next, is that the word in this. Now, in this that I declare unto you, the word in Greek is in this thing. And that's the question in this whole section right now, is what thing? In what thing is he not praising them? Do you know that he doesn't tell us what he's not praising them about for 4 verses? He keeps on saying, in this thing I praise you not, and in this I read, and he goes on, and you're going, what? And the tension is building until he finally tells us what the problem is. And it comes later on in here. In this thing that I declare unto you. Now that word declare is an interesting word, is that word means a directive from an authoritative source. It means to pass on a command from a military commander. So this would be like a lieutenant passing on orders to his troops, to the sergeant, to the privates, to those under his command. He's passing on. He is not saying, I'm telling you to do this. He's saying, the commander told me to tell you to do this. And that's what this word, I declare unto you, means. He's not just simply giving them his own opinion or his own advice. He is telling them, this is orders from the commander, and you have an obligation to obey it. Now, there was people, and we will see more and more of this in this section here. There was people in Corinth that absolutely resented Paul coming and saying, I have a command from the Lord for you. Ooh, they did not receive that. They did not accept it. And we'll find out who those people were as we go along here. But he spends 2 chapters in this letter, 4 and 9, defending the fact that he had a word from the commander for them. Now, they didn't buy it because he wrote the second letter that we have there. It's even more anguished. He's more anguished about this thing that they just absolutely refused to receive him as coming with a word, that an order, a message for them from God. There's a difference between this where he says, I don't praise you because I declared something to you and you're not doing it, which is different than in the first part of the chapter where he says, I praise you for the directions that you are doing. But the thing about it is that the directions that he gave in the first part of that was a whole different word. The word was paradosis, which means I'm passing along to you things that I heard from somebody who passed it along from somebody else, who passed it along from somebody else, passed it along from somebody else. So he was in that, they're saying, well, yeah, we're doing exactly what you told us to do about these less important things, or these less piercing things. But when he comes and he says, I got it directly from the Lord to you, then there's a problem along the way. So in the first place he says, yeah, I praise you. Yes, I praise you for this thing and that thing and the other thing, but I don't praise you any longer for this other thing. I praise you not is the next phrase there. And the word praise there means to applaud over. To applaud over. Now, I didn't watch it or anything like that, and it seems like there's constantly one award ceremony after another on TV. I don't watch them. All they're doing is applauding over each other. They create these huge events so that they can applaud over one another and stroke each other on these things, and just along the way. But this is what he says, I refuse to applaud over you. You got to understand something. In our culture, I mean, there's plenty of applause seeking along the way, but nothing like it was in Corinthian society in the first century. The Corinthian society was tightly bound into a class or rank structure. It was what sociologists call a honor-shame culture. If you're in a class structure, everybody from the emperor on down to the lowest slave was tightly held into a ladder structure. You could not move on that ladder from where you were unless you could earn honor. You had to earn honor or praise or be applauded over in Corinth, in Rome, in Greece, actually all around the Mediterranean, and it's like that today too. I know some of you have been tourists there, but I lived in an Italian colony for my growing up years. I know what the honor shame culture is like. They kill or die for it. Kill or die for it along the way. The only way you could move from your social rank and the class that you were born into or you were set into either by birth or by war or by economics. Those are the three things that set you into a certain rank in their culture, in the society. The only way you could move up or down in that was you must earn honor to move up. That means you do things that the community will applaud over you on. Just like the Hollywood has their community, right? And they just need to be applauded over in order to move up. That's the way you move up. Get applauded over. Of course, the apostles just wouldn't have anything to do with it. Others of the apostles said some of the same things. So the reason why that was important to be applauded over is because if you could move up, that increased your power in the community. You could actually get what you wanted done in your community if you had the applause and you had earned honor. Chapter 12 talks a lot about, 1 Corinthians 12 talks a lot about honor and how to earn honor in the social system of the kingdom of God. Here we're talking about the social system of the Roman Empire, because Corinth was a Roman colony. They did everything the way Rome does it. The other thing is that you will move downward on this ladder scale. You can move down further on that and become lower class, lower in rank, by doing something that will lay you open to the shame of the community that you are in. In other words, they will refuse to applaud over you. Now that's serious business, because that meant you would be financially punished because you just were not of the rank to be considered as a client. It meant that you could go down in a lot of ways, but it reduces your power to get what you want done in your community. And of course, at the very bottom of that was the slaves, but even they were tightly held into a ranking system. They could move up or down, even they could, and the emperor was in that system too. If he got shamed, if there was something that his community refused to applaud, but that's why there was emperor worship, just to keep him powerful all the time. But that's the culture that they lived in. When Paul says, I refuse to applaud over you, He was saying something serious to the Corinthians. He was saying, in our community, you will lose your ability to get things done. You will lose the ability to have an impact in this culture that we've got here. It was a full-time job for Corinthians to earn honor and avoid shame. It's what they did all day long. It was their job, because if they could earn honor, that meant money, that meant prosperity, that meant high standing, and people will take you seriously. If you earned shame, then nobody takes you seriously. Suddenly you're out, and it definitely happened, even to emperors along the way. I praise you not because, that word that, I praise you not that you come together. That word simply means because there. I praise you not because you come together. Paul uses, in this section here, he uses that term, you come together, 5 times. This is the big theme within this section here, is you come together. Yes, where the thing was that he was so indignant about and so worked up over, it was happening when they came together. I praise you not because you come together not for the better. Next page there. Sorry? Yeah, it's hard to read. Oh. Okay, so when you come together, it's not for the better. Now, what does Paul mean by the better? We got to have something if we're going to talk about what's the worst, you've got to have something to measure it by. And Paul provides his definition of what coming together for the better is in a couple chapters, because he's not done with this subject until the end of 14. So if you look in chapter 14, you'll find out Paul's definition of for the better in verse 26. It says, when you come together, brethren, every one of you hath a psalm, what is it now? A revelation, a tongue, an interpretation. Every one of you has, let all things be done unto edifying. So that's what his definition of coming together for the better is. However, he's going to describe what their coming together looked like here in just a second. He also, other places where he describes coming together for the worse, in other places as well, but this is the one that he's after. But for the worse, the word worse means injurious by way of thinking, feeling, or acting. Okay, and I'm going to break down those 3. How their behavior, how they're coming together was injurious in thinking, in feeling, and in acting later on as we come on. But their meetings were supposed to build up and edify, but instead their meetings were tearing down, destroying. Paul was not happy. Verse 18, for first of all, when you come together in the church, I hear that there be divisions among you, and I partly believe it. Well, there's a lot there, but first thing that comes up is first of all. Now, as soon as he says that, all of us instinctively are waiting for the second of all. Okay, I just want to relieve you. There is no second of all that shows up in this section. It's just not there, so you don't have to look anymore. Some have said that the second of all doesn't, the second shoe doesn't fall until chapter 12, but that's just somebody's opinion. Okay, so there is no second of all. When you come together, and here's the second time, he will not leave this alone, because the thing that he's so upset about was happening when they come together. They were technically and legalistically coming together. In fact, I think that was one of the things that he was saying. He was saying, yeah, I guess I got to praise you because technically you are following the traditions, the paradoses that I handed on from you, and I handed them on to you because I got them from somebody else, who got them from somebody else, who got them from somebody else. They're called the traditions. The traditions. Okay? Now there's good traditions. Okay, there are true and valuable traditions. The thing about it is that one of those traditions, I suspect that one of the traditions that the Corinthian church people were following and boasting about, remember they sent him a letter, at least one letter, and if you read the letter that in Paul's response, you'll find out that they were boasting to Paul about how well they were doing. And one of the things I think they were boasting to him is that we're following the directions you gave us to meet regularly. Yep, we're meeting regularly. Yeah, we're doing great. Thing about it is that they were technically meeting together regularly, but they were not together, they were not lovingly being together. They were acting together, they were present, but there was no unity of the Spirit. They were miles apart on very many levels. Socially, miles apart. Economically, miles apart. Culturally, miles apart. Remember, Corinth was a melting pot. Okay? But it had one major elephant in the room, and that was the Roman presence. The Roman presence was the big factor in Corinth. Regardless of where you were from, if you came to Corinth, you were going to knuckle under and do things the way Rome did, because this was a Roman colony. So they were miles apart on many levels, and the Romans liked it that way. They instituted class system. It's not that there wasn't class system worldwide, because that's just part of the flesh. But they made it into a machine. They made it more efficient. They made it more powerful. They just made it into something that ground you down, as the Romans always did with everything they got a hold of. Okay. When you come together in the church. That's the next page. I find that that's really an interesting phrase. When you come together in the church, church is the Greek word ecclesia. It just means a calling out. Okay. Now, you can be called out in a lot of different ways, but if you're going to be called out in the church, there's some interesting things that need to be said about being called out. Is that if you're going to be called out in the church of God, that means that the whole group, the definition is that it's a group of people called out for a special purpose. Now that fits on a doctrinal and theological level, but it also fits in a very practical and everyday mundane level as well. It's a group of people called out for a special purpose. Number one, the group has to hear the same call. Everybody's got to hear the same call if they're all going to be called out for the same purpose. So you got to hear the same call. 1 Peter 2:9 says that you have been called out of darkness into his marvelous light. We've been transferred from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of his beloved Son. So that is one definition of the called out ones. But there is also the way that was most often understood in first century was that it meant that people were called out of their houses to an assembly. They were called out, and ecclesia was not a Christian term. This was a term that Christians borrowed from everyday life. Ecclesia meant we're having a town meeting. We're having a meeting of the guild of brass workers or anything like that, and it's a group of people that are called out for the same purpose. They're there for the purpose to enhance their trade or to make decisions about the town or their community, their neighborhood, things like that. The other part of ecclesia is that the group has to have the same special purpose. Okay? And again, back to 1 Peter, it says that our purpose is to show forth the praises of him who has called you out of darkness. Okay? Another purpose that those that were called out in the church, the purpose that they had is back to 1 Corinthians verse 14, verses 12 and 26, where both places say, you are called out for the purpose of edifying each other, encouraging, building up, strengthening, making it more clear for each other why you're in this way. That's edifying. Now, in the church, you come together in the church, has been misunderstood many times to think that it means that people are coming together by entering a building. And that I had a fight break out in my class one time, and when I finally got to the bottom of it, to my surprise, the beginning of the fight started. I mean, it didn't take long for it to escalate, but the beginning of the fight was between two boys in my class, teenage boys in my class, one who said that a church was a building, and the other one said, no, the church is people, is a group of people. Is not, is so, is not. Pretty soon there's fists, chairs, flying, everything around there. But it was interesting that there was a misunderstanding even amongst my secular students about this issue of church. Here's the fact, is that in first century, Christians had no buildings that were dedicated to the worship of Jesus Christ. There was no buildings for them. So how could Paul say when you come together in the church? It sounds like a contradiction, but no, it's not at all, because you can still be in the church and have no building. And that's good news for all of us. I know that some say you got to have brick and mortar, otherwise you can't get anything done that's of any edification. The early church proves that to be not true. Okay, a person is in the church when they believe the same thing that Peter did. Jesus was the first one to use the word church. It's in Matthew chapter 18, I think. Is that, who do you say that I am? Peter says, you're the Christ, Son of the living God. Flesh and blood has not revealed that to you, but my Father in heaven. You are Peter, and upon this rock, and that's another misunderstanding. They think that he's talking about Peter being the rock, but it was what he said. It was his faith that was the rock that he was going to build his church upon. Anybody who has the same faith that Peter had when he expressed that, you're the Christ, you're the Son of the living God, is in the church. You have been built into the church by faith. And that's being built into the church. All right, let's move on here. If I can get a hold of the next page. All right. There. Now, that's the theological thing of the church. But what about the practical thing of the church? Okay, you can say, okay, we all believe that he's the Christ, the Son of the living God, and we sit out in the snowbank. Okay? But when it comes to the practical things of how to come together as the church, first century Christians had three options that I can see. There might be more, but I don't think there's too many more. You could meet outside. Most of the Mediterranean, you could do that, kind of. Or you could get Paul to make you a really, really big tent. You could rent an indoor space. And there's accounts throughout the New Testament of meeting outside and meeting in rented spaces. But the third one is this: meet in each other's private homes. Now, this is the choice that they most often took, right here. And I think I was counting up recently, and I think I see at least, I think it was 7 or 8 different places within the letters of Paul where it alludes to the church that is in their homes. Okay? And it even will name the name of the people who own the homes along the way in there. So that was the choice of meeting together, to coming together in the church, was the homes, and that's what they were doing in Corinth. Okay? Those that had homes with adequate facilities to accommodate a good-sized group of people. Okay? I hear is the next words in there. They come together in the church. I hear. Oh, I just think that that's such a pregnant phrase there, because he had to hear about this problem that they were having by word of mouth. Now remember, they had written to him at least one letter, most likely 2 letters by this time, telling how wonderful they were and how Paul needed to get with it. You know, you need to be like us, Paul, because we're so spiritual. And fine, but see, they conveniently left out the fact that there was divisions among them. He had to hear that from eyewitnesses who then reported that to him verbally. And you'll find that in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 11, where he says, it's reported from them of the house of Chloe. And won't get into all of who Chloe is at this point, but eyewitness reports. They knew they would receive no applause if they wrote that to him. Yeah, we're doing okay, except we have a strict class culture that we refuse to move on in our church. That there be divisions among you. Now, the word division is the word schisma. It literally means a cleft, a crack, but figuratively it means an inconsistency. I hear that there is an inconsistency among you. It also means a sharp distinction between. I hear that there is a sharp distinction between you, among you. I hear that there is cause for you to stand apart from one another. Those are all definitions out of the Greek dictionaries of what schisma is. Verse 21 and 22, Paul describes the circumstances that caused them to literally stand apart from each other. When they came together in the church, they would come together in somebody's home and they would literally be standing. There was some that could only stand. You read in the literature about about the culture, not only in Corinth, but all around the Mediterranean there, is that they had assigned seats. And James talks about this because it wasn't only the Romans and the Greeks that had this, but James is rebuking the 12 tribes for the same kind of thing, where this guy sits here and this guy stands over there, and this guy, and he says, "Are you not being inconsistent?" Is the same word. There's the word that's being used there. It's the same one that's being used here along the way. So there was an inconsistency in one specific area that I'll unpack it more, but it had to do with the care that was shown to the rich and the lack of care that was shown to the poor. If you go over to the next chapter in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, you'll find out that Paul talks about divisions again. In verse 25, there it says, that there be no schism, there be no division among you, but you should have the same care one for another. This division had to do with who got the care and who didn't get the care. And Paul was wound up about this. This struck at the core of the gospel more than many things. He was wound up about it. Who are we talking about here? We'll go on to the next slide here. Who are we talking about in this church in Corinth? Anyway, they sound like what are we talking about as far as demographics go? It is estimated, now these are just estimates, okay? And and most of these estimates got not from church records or scripture records, but they got these, Romans and Greeks wrote down everything. So there was something about everything. All you had to do is dig for it and you could find it. But they did, the archaeologists and sociologists, they compared other what they called associations or groups that were called out for a certain purpose, ecclesias, okay? Within Corinth, they looked at other ecclesias, secular ecclesias, where people were called out to a assembly together on a regular basis. Guilds had lots of records about these assemblies and everything. And so there's a cross-section of people that you can look at in these records and find out that there's kind of an estimate here of who would be a part of the Corinthian church. This is what they're saying. It's estimated 80% of the Corinthian congregation was Greek or Roman freedmen. Now, freedmen are emancipated slaves. They had been slaves, but now they had been freed, but that was not necessarily good news all the time. Let's see if I can find in my notes here. Yeah. It talks about it. They were the working poor. As when I got out of my professional suit and started working in blue-collar jobs in Bemidji, I found out that there's a whole class of people in Bemidji called the working poor. You probably don't, you may not even know any of them. You know why? Because they're always working. They're always working. But they're poor because they work low-paying jobs. They've got all kinds of circumstances in their lives that are just undercutting them. They owe big-time money, or they're single parents, or there's many other reasons, but they cobble together 2, 3, 4 little jobs, and they have to juggle those little jobs to just make ends meet. That's the working poor. I love the working poor now that I've had a chance to be with them more. Now, here's the thing, is that they were worse than slaves in Corinth. I want to read this to you. I find this really interesting. It says, former masters, this is by a scholar who did nothing but study the people of the New Testament. And of course, he focused a lot on Corinth. He says, the former masters still wielded considerable influence over their freedmen's lives. Freedmen and freedwomen must grant financial assistance to their former masters. In other words, they had to give part of their earnings to their former masters. It was Roman law. That's the way the Romans wanted it. Slaves were freed so they might return a portion of their earnings to their former masters. They were actually freed so that they could do that. It increased the income for the masters. Many slave owners were motivated to manumit or free their slaves for increased profits, making the freedmen and freedwomen financially worse off than slaves. You got 80% of the congregation that's in that kind of bind. Okay? They were too tired to make a fuss over the things that Paul has to rebuke the Corinthian church over. These weren't the ones making the problem. 15% were slaves. In other words, the slaves were envied by the freedmen many times. 3% freeborn merchants, craftsmen, and Jewish families. And 1 or 2% Roman army veterans and their families. 1 Corinthians 1:26 says there's not many noble. Well, guess what? There were some noble. And they were the Roman veterans. Remember, Julius Caesar recolonized Corinth. It laid waste for 140 some years after the Romans did their efficient thing. And he decided he was going to recolonize it. And the ones that he sent to, and the ones he gave the property, the land, and the authority over that new colony were his Roman officers that were retired. And this was how he paid for their service. Can you imagine what a Roman centurion's attitude toward Paul would be? When Paul came and says, I have a command from God for you. He was used to giving orders. He was not going to receive orders from this little whatever here. See the problem here? See the problem along the way. Because these people groups in the church were so different from each other, they most likely did not interact very often outside of the church assemblies. Freedmen had no time to interact with anybody else. The slaves, they could only do that which their masters told them to do. So they were pretty much either in the master's fields, businesses. Corinth had a big trade in hauling goods from one side of this little neck of land to the other side of this little neck of land. Slaves, it was all slaves. I tell you what, that's what you did until you died. Corinth, great place. Great statues they had. Wonderful statues. But they didn't interact very much with each other. Those Romans were not interacting with their slaves that they freed, except to shake them down and send their muscle to enforce what you owe me. This was organized crime. Guess where organized crime originated from? Right here. Right here. In Corinth, in Sicily, and Italy. In the case of in this case, the division among the people of the Corinthian church was not doctrinal. We think of divisions, so much of the time we think of them as doctrinal divisions. That one group will kill or die over one doctrine over against another doctrine. But this had nothing to do with doctrines. I mean, they had doctrinal problems too, and Paul doesn't get around to rebuking them on that until chapter 16. But at this point, the division is not, it's social class, social rank differences. Those with an abundance were considered by the Corinthian society to be of high class, and those with little or nothing were considered to be of low class. This is what the divisions were all about in Corinth in chapter 11 here. All right, got just a couple more minutes here. Get to the next page. Next slide. See how far I can get on this. Oh, yeah. So now you've got this situation where you've got legalized crime, what we would call rampant corruption as a lifestyle for 1,000 years. Okay? This was entrenched in them. And then along comes the gospel. Along comes the gospel and says there's a different class structure in God's kingdom. Okay, with the coming of the gospel, these class-conscious believers were called upon to forsake their old social class structure and embrace a new social structure where there is no class divisions. What does it say? I'll get to that here in just a second. That's chapter 12, verse 13. Where there's no class divisions, whether you be Jews or Gentiles, whether ye be bond or free, and that all the members should have the same care one for another. Not unequal care depending upon your birth or your other things, but the same care. That was a huge adjustment for everybody in Corinth. It was a welcome adjustment to the freedmen, to the slaves. That was a welcome idea. You mean I would not be despised for being who I am through no choice of my own? But it was not good news for the ones at the top of the ladder. It was not good news for them at all. And in fact, they were supposed to receive the lower class as equals. And when you get further into this, you find out is that Paul is saying, I received from the Lord that you should treat the freedman that you set free so you could earn more money off of him. You should treat him the same way Jesus did his disciples. What? Not only did they refuse to do that, they doubled down on the old social order. There were those in the church, those Roman army veterans and their families, they held on even more tightly to their class structure. And they could make it stick. They could make that, and they can enforce that. I can't get into that now because my time has run out, but I will start here next time telling you why this small minority of church people in the Corinthian church could sway and influence and hold the whole rest of the congregation under their thumb. We'll get into that here in just a little next week.